When Marcus and Michael Thompson joined the Warriors Path Karate Dojo, they knew being among the few black students in a predominantly white school would be challenging. But they never anticipated the hostility that awaited them. On their first day, they encountered Jake Harrison and Connor Mills, two arrogant black belt bullies who made it their mission to break the 14-year-old twins. The bullying escalated quickly, with Jake making racist comments about monkeys trying to mimic human movements. But what the bullies didn't know was that every night after their humiliation, the twins secretly trained with their father. The bullies thought they were crushing two helpless yellow belts, but they were gravely mistaken. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The heavy bag swayed under Marcus Thompson's unpolished strikes. Each punch landed with a dull thud, revealing his lack of experience. Sweat dotted his forehead as he struggled through the combination his instructor had demonstrated: jab, cross, hook. His timing felt off, his stance unsteady. Beside him, his twin brother Michael mimicked the same sequence, moving in perfect synchronicity. At 14, they were the same height, the same athletic build from years of basketball, and the same determined look that masked their nervousness in this unfamiliar space. "Yellow belts, over here," Sensei Robert Mitchell called out from across the dojo. The 50-year-old instructor moved with calm authority, his black belt worn soft from years of practice. "Time to work on basic stances," he instructed. The dojo, located in Millbrook's Eastgate Shopping Plaza, was filled with 20 students, most in white G's, their colored belts marking their progress. The Thompson twins stood out, not just as two of only 3 black students in the school, but as the newest members, having earned their yellow belts just 2 weeks ago after 3 months of white belt training. "Hold your horse stance for 1 minute," Sensei Mitchell instructed. The twins dropped into position, their thighs burning as they held the wide-legged squat. Around them, more experienced students moved through advanced forms with fluid precision, highlighting just how new the brothers were to martial arts. "Look at the twins," Jake Harrison's voice carried from across the room. His tone was mocking, and it made Marcus's shoulders tense, like watching 2 monkeys trying to figure out human movements. Connor Mills snickered beside him, adding, "Maybe they'll learn faster if we throw them some bananas." The words stung like physical blows. Marcus's stance wavered, and immediately Michael's did too. Their twin bond amplified their emotions. When one felt humiliated, the shame doubled. Several other students overheard the comments, their eyes darting between the twins and the bullies with uncomfortable awareness. "Keep your back straight," Sensei Mitchell continued, seemingly unaware of the tension in the room. "Power comes from a solid foundation." Michael clenched his jaw, fists at his sides. Marcus could feel his brother's anger, as if it were his own. The twins shared everything, including the pain and frustration. "Time for sparring drills," Sensei Mitchell announced, clapping his hands twice. "Partner up with someone near your skill level." Marcus wiped his palms on his GI and looked around for another yellow belt. But Jake was already approaching, his predatory smile in place. "Fresh meat," Jake taunted, his voice dripping with amusement. "Let's see what these two can really do." Michael whispered, "We should partner with other yellow belts," trying to find a way out. But Connor Mills had already joined them, his black belt a stark contrast to their yellow ones. "We'll teach you some real techniques," Connor said, his tone casual yet laced with racism. "Unless you'd rather go back to whatever you learned on the streets." Marcus felt his vision blur with anger. He started to step forward, but Michael's hand caught his arm, their twin awareness stopping him from engaging in a confrontation that would only make things worse. "Bow to your partner," Sensei Mitchell called from across the room. Marcus found himself facing Connor while Jake positioned himself opposite Michael. The twins exchanged a quick glance, a wordless communication that had always kept them in sync. "Stay calm, stick together, survive this," Michael silently conveyed. The sparring began. From the first strike, Marcus knew they were in trouble. Connor's kick landed solidly in his ribs, sending the wind from his lungs and knocking him back. "Oops," Connor said with theatrical concern. "Guess these yellow belts are softer than they look." On the other mat, Michael was receiving the same treatment. Jake's punches landed with precision, intentionally targeting the twins' weaknesses. When Michael attempted to counter, Jake easily deflected it and swept Michael to the ground. "Stay down there," Jake sneered, refusing to help. "That's where you belong." Despite the humiliation, Michael pushed himself up, ready to face whatever came next. Embarrassment and fury warred on Marcus's face as he felt every bit of his brother's humiliation. Their twin bond made the abuse even more painful. The sparring continued for another 10 excruciating minutes, both twins accumulating bruises while Jake and Connor maintained their facade of instruction. Their taunts grew bolder as Sensei Mitchell remained conspicuously focused on other students. "Maybe your daddy should have signed you up for basketball instead," Connor panted after landing an accidental elbow to Marcus's shoulder. "Stick to what your people are good at." "We're not quitting," Marcus said through gritted teeth, tasting blood from a split lip. "We'll see about that," Jake replied, helping Michael up after a particularly rough takedown. This dojo has standards. As the session finally ended, the twins gathered their gear in painful silence, both limping slightly. Their yellow belts were a stark reminder of how outmatched they'd been. Around them, other students avoided eye contact, the discomfort in the room palpable. "Good work today," Sensei Mitchell announced to the class. "Remember, martial arts builds character through discipline and respect." The irony wasn't lost on either twin as they headed for the exit. Marcus noticed Jake and Connor talking quietly near the equipment rack. Their voices were just loud enough to catch fragments. "They won't last another month. Daddy's probably in prison anyway. Should stick to their own kind of places." Michael's step faltered, and Marcus felt his brother's control slip. Before they could react, their father's pickup truck rumbled into the parking lot, announcing David Thompson's arrival. The twins quickly tried to mask their pain, but their identical injuries told a story that would be hard to explain. David Thompson climbed out of his truck, his construction-hardened frame moving with the efficiency of a man who had served 8 years in the Army before starting his family. His dark eyes immediately cataloged his son's disheveled appearance, the way they moved, the forced casualness of their postures. "How was class?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority that had earned him respect for 2 decades. "Fine," both boys replied in perfect unison, their twin synchronization intact, even in deception. David studied them for a long moment, his gaze lingering on Marcus's split lip and Michael's bruised forearms. "Learn anything useful?" "Yeah," Marcus said, sharing a look with Michael that conveyed more than words could. "We learned a lot." 3 weeks passed, and the pattern became as predictable as it was painful. Every Tuesday and Thursday, the twins would arrive at the dojo, ready to fight through their struggles, only to be systematically broken down by Jake and Connor. "Today, during our 6th week of classes, advanced students will help beginners with sparring fundamentals," Sensei Mitchell announced. Marcus felt his stomach drop as Jake's eyes locked onto his across the room. The predatory smile had become as familiar as his own reflection. "Looks like Christmas came early," Connor murmured to Jake loud enough for several students to hear. Fresh targets. The sparring session began with what appeared to be legitimate instruction. Jake demonstrated a basic blocking technique to Michael, his movements slow and controlled for the benefit of the watching parents in the observation area. "See how I position my arm?" Jake said in a patient, instructor-like tone. "Try it!" Michael mimicked the movement, and Jake nodded approvingly, before, without warning, his follow-up strike slipped past Michael's guard and hit him in the solar plexus. Michael doubled over, gasping for air. "You dropped your guard," Jake said with fake concern. "In a real fight, that hesitation could get you hurt." Marcus started forward, but Connor intercepted him with a firm grip on his shoulder. Your brother needs to learn for himself, Connor sneered. Unless you think he's too weak to handle real training. The challenge hung in the air. Marcus knew refusing would mean abandoning Michael, but accepting meant enduring Connor's particular brand of instruction. I can handle whatever you've got, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. Connor's grin widened. Good, let's work on combinations. What followed was 20 minutes of systematic abuse disguised as training. Connor's strikes landed harder than necessary, and his corrections were accompanied by shoves and trips that sent Marcus sprawling across the mat. You're too aggressive, Connor said after a leg sweep sent Marcus crashing to the floor. Your people always think force solves everything, but martial arts is about control. The racial undertone was subtle enough to avoid direct confrontation, but deep enough to wound. Marcus could feel his anger building. The familiar fire Michael usually helped him control, but his brother was across the mat, struggling with Jake's increasingly violent demonstrations. Every technique seemed to send Michael crashing to the floor, winded and disoriented. Maybe you should consider a different hobby, Jake suggested as he helped Michael up from another hard throw. Something more natural for you. Basketball, maybe. Running. I'm not quitting, Michael said, his voice steady but quiet. Determination drove Marcus to push through yet another punishing drill. From his position near the front desk, Sensei Mitchell watched the sessions with apparent satisfaction. When concerned parents questioned the intensity of the training, he spoke about building character through adversity. Traditional martial arts aren't for everyone, he explained to one mother whose son had requested to switch partners. We maintain high standards here. After class, the twins sat silently in their father's truck, ice packs pressed to their injuries. The quiet between them was thick with shared frustration and growing desperation. Dad's going to notice eventually, Michael said, adjusting the ice on his bruised ribs. We tell him we're learning, Marcus replied, which is true. Learning what? That we don't belong here? Marcus turned to study his brother's profile. Despite being twins, their reactions to adversity had always been different. Marcus burned with intensity, while Michael internalized everything until it consumed him from within. We belong anywhere we want to be, Marcus said firmly. They don't get to decide that for us. Tell that to my ribs. 2 days later, David Thompson made an unexpected decision. Instead of dropping the boys off at the dojo entrance, he parked and walked them inside, claiming he wanted to observe a class. The twins exchanged nervous glances as their father settled into the small seating area reserved for parents. His presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. His military bearing and obvious protectiveness created a buffer the boys hadn't felt in weeks. Mr. Thompson, Sensei Mitchell greeted with professional courtesy. Nice to see a parent taking an interest in their children's training. Always interested in my boys' education, David replied, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp as they surveyed the room. That evening's class proceeded differently. Jake and Connor maintained their roles as senior students, but their comments became more subtle. Their physical contact was more carefully controlled. The racial undertones remained, but they were delivered with surgical precision, designed to avoid detection by the adult observers. Good effort today, Jake said to Michael after a particularly brutal grappling session. You're really improving. Your father must be proud of how well you're adapting to our environment. The word adapting carried unmistakable meaning, but it was delivered with such apparent sincerity that David, watching from across the room, saw nothing but encouragement. Connor employed similar tactics with Marcus, offering praise laced with condescension. You're getting better at taking direction. It's good to see you learning your place in the hierarchy. After class, David spoke briefly with Sensei Mitchell about the boys' progress. They're dedicated students, the instructor said. Natural athleticism, but they need to understand that martial arts is about more than physical ability. It's about fitting into a structured environment. They're good kids, David replied. been raised to respect authority and work hard. I can see that with the right guidance, they'll find their proper level here." The phrase proper level struck both twins like physical blows, though it sailed past David's awareness. On the drive home, David expressed satisfaction with what he had observed. "Looks like you boys are getting good training in there. That Mitchell fellow runs a tight ship." "Yes, sir," both boys replied, their synchronized response masking the bitter irony of their father's approval. Those older students seem helpful too. Good to see experienced kids taking newcomers under their wing. Marcus stared out the passenger window, watching familiar streets blur past. His father's interpretation of events felt like living in an alternate reality, one where mentorship replaced torment, where guidance masked systematic humiliation. "They're teaching us a lot," Michael said quietly from the back seat. And technically, it was true, Marcus thought. They were learning about institutional racism, about how authority figures could enable abuse through willful blindness, about how victims could be isolated even in crowded rooms. "That's what I like to hear," David said, pulling into their driveway. "Martial arts builds character, teaches you to handle whatever life throws at you." As they gathered their gear bags, Marcus caught his brother's eye in the truck's dome light. Without words, they shared the same thought. They were handling what life threw at them, but not in the way their father imagined. That night, lying in their shared bedroom, the twins finally spoke openly about their situation. "It's not getting better," Michael whispered in the darkness. "I know." What if we told Dad the truth? Marcus considered this. Their father had always taught them to fight their own battles, to never run from challenges, to earn respect through perseverance. How could they explain that the system itself was rigged against them? He wouldn't believe it, Marcus said finally. He saw Mitchell tonight, saw Jake and Connor. Everything looked normal to him because they made it look normal. Exactly. And if we complain, we look like quitters. Like we can't handle real training. Michael was silent for so long that Marcus thought he'd fallen asleep. Then his brother's voice came through the darkness, carrying a resolve that matched Marcus's own burning determination. "Then we get better. Strong enough that they can't hurt us anymore." "How?" "They're black belts. We just got our yellow belts." "I don't know yet," Michael admitted, "but there has to be a way." Outside their window, the suburban street lay peaceful under the streetlights. David Thompson had worked tirelessly to build the American dream for his family, but inside his home, two 14-year-old boys were planning their survival in a war their father couldn't see and their instructors refused to acknowledge. The 8th week of classes began, like all the others, Marcus and Michael gathering their gear while their father finished his coffee in the kitchen. His exhaustion from working overtime on a commercial project was evident in the dark circles beneath his eyes. "You boys need a ride home tonight?" he asked, checking his watch. "I might be able to swing by after my meeting with the electrical contractor." "We can walk," Marcus said quickly, not wanting their father to witness another session of disguised abuse. "It's getting dark earlier now," David pointed out. "I don't mind picking you up." "Really, Dad, we're fine," Michael added. "The fresh air helps us cool down after training." David studied them for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but call if you change your minds." At the dojo, the evening began with basic form practice. The twins had been working on their techniques at home, using online videos to supplement their limited instruction, and their improvement was noticeable. "Time for partner drills," Sensei Mitchell announced. "Today, we're working on defensive techniques against multiple attackers." The exercise was designed for advanced students, but somehow, the twins found themselves selected as demonstration partners. Jake and Connor volunteered to show proper technique, their eagerness raising red flags that went unnoticed by their instructor. "The key is staying mobile," Jake explained to the class as he and Connor circled the twins. "When you're outnumbered, you can't plant your feet and trade punches." What followed was a masterclass in sanctioned violence disguised as defensive instruction. Jake and Connor subjected the twins to a sustained assault, leaving them bloodied and disoriented. "See how they're trying to back up?" Connor called out, sweeping Michael's legs and sending him crashing to the mat. "That's exactly what not to do. Natural instincts don't work in real martial arts." Marcus tried to help his brother up, but Jake intercepted him with a knee strike that doubled him over. "Focus on your own survival first," Jake instructed the class, grinding Marcus's face into the mat. "Can't help your partner if you're on the ground where you belong." The demonstration continued for 15 brutal minutes. Every time one twin tried to recover, the other was targeted, keeping both off balance and unable to mount any effective defense. "Some people just aren't cut out for this level of training," Jake added, helping Michael up with a grip that left finger-shaped bruises on his arm. As class ended, the twins gathered their gear with practiced stoicism. Their bodies ached and their pride was shattered, but they'd survived another session. Outside the dojo, they were surprised to see their father's pickup truck pulling into the parking lot. David's contractor meeting had ended early, and he'd decided to surprise them with a ride home. Through the large front windows, he could see Jake and Connor laughing with other students near the equipment rack. Their voices carried clearly through the glass. "Did you see how fast they went down?" Connor said. "Like they've never been in a real fight before," Jake replied. "Probably learned everything they know on the streets." "No discipline, no technique," Connor added. "Just wild swinging like animals." David's blood turned to ice as the racial implications hit him. Then his sons emerged from the building. Even in the parking lot's dim lighting, the extent of their injuries was impossible to miss. Marcus's lip was split and swollen, his GI torn at the shoulder. Michael moved with the careful gait of someone nursing bruised ribs. David's military training kicked in immediately. He had seen enough injured soldiers to recognize systematic abuse. "Get in the truck," he said quietly, his voice carrying controlled fury. At home, under the harsh kitchen lights, the full extent of their injuries became undeniable. "How long?" David asked. "Dad, it's not," Marcus began. "How long?" David repeated, his command voice cutting through their deflection. "Since the beginning," Michael said quietly. "Since our first day." The story poured out, 8 weeks of systematic brutalization, while David had praised their character building. "The instructor saw all this?" he asked. "He was right there," Marcus said. "But when you visited, they made everything look normal." David paced to the window, his reflection showing a man wrestling with decisions that would define his family's future. "What do we do?" Michael asked. David was quiet for a moment, his mind working through options with military precision. Then he made his decision. "We give them one chance to make this right. I'll speak to Mitchell tomorrow." "What if he doesn't listen?" Marcus asked. David's smile held no warmth. "Then we handled it ourselves." That night, David retrieved a heavy bag and focus mitts from his garage. If the system wouldn't protect his sons, he'd give them the tools to protect themselves. The next evening, David walked into the dojo with purposeful stride. Sensei Mitchell looked up from the front desk with professional courtesy, which quickly shifted to concern. "Mr. Thompson, what can I do for you?" "We need to talk about my sons and what's been happening in your classes." Mitchell's face remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "Of course, let's step into my office," he said. As they walked toward the back, Jake and Connor looked up from their warm-ups. Their expressions shifted from arrogance to concern. Everything was about to change. David followed Sensei Mitchell, his determination unwavering. David Thompson walked into the cramped office behind the front desk, his eyes taking in the framed certificates, tournament photos, and motivational posters that decorated the walls. Everything about the space projected authority and tradition, exactly the kind of environment that could conceal systematic abuse behind a veneer of respectability. "Please have a seat," Mitchell said, settling behind his desk with the casual confidence of a man who had handled difficult parents before. "What seems to be the concern?" David remained standing, his construction-hardened frame filling the small space with barely contained tension. My sons have been getting beaten up in your classes for 2 months, systematically harassed, targeted with racial comments, and physically abused by your black belt students. Mitchell's expression shifted to practiced concern. Mr. Thompson, I understand training can be intense, especially for newer students, but what you're describing doesn't sound like the program we run here. Jake Harrison and Connor Mills have been using my boys as punching bags, David continued, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable edge, under your supervision, in front of other students, and you've done nothing to stop it. Those are serious allegations, Mitchell replied, leaning back in his chair. Jake and Connor are exemplary students from respected families. They've been training here for years. The emphasis on respected families wasn't lost on David. Are you saying my sons are lying? I'm saying young people sometimes misinterpret firm instruction as harassment. Martial arts training can be challenging, and not everyone is suited for it. David's hands clenched into fists. Last night, I heard those boys calling my sons animals, making jokes about street fighting. Are you going to tell me that's firm instruction? Mitchell's composure cracked slightly. I wasn't aware of any inappropriate language. If something was said, you were 10 feet away when it happened. Don't insult my intelligence, David snapped. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken threats and failed responsibilities. Mitchell cleared his throat and shuffled some papers on his desk. Perhaps we can find a solution that works for everyone, he said finally. The Harrison and Mills families have been significant supporters of this dojo. Their contributions help keep our doors open and provide scholarships for other students. So you're protecting them because they pay you? David asked, his tone colder now. I'm maintaining a delicate balance that benefits the entire school community. Your sons are capable young men, but they might be happier in a different environment, something more suited to their background. David stepped closer to the desk, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. Their background? You mean being black? I mean being new to structured training environments. Some students adapt better to traditional discipline than others. Traditional discipline, David repeated, his voice laced with scorn. Is that what you call 2 black belts beating up yellow belts while you watch? Mitchell stood up, matching David's aggressive posture. Mr. Thompson, I've been running this dojo for 15 years. I know the difference between training and abuse. If your sons are struggling with the intensity of our program, they're not struggling, they're being targeted. Then perhaps this isn't the right school for them, Mitchell said, his words hanging in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. David studied Mitchell's face, seeing the calculation behind the man's eyes. This wasn't ignorance or oversight. It was willful complicity dressed up as business necessity. So, that's your solution? My sons leave quietly, and you continue taking money from racist parents to let their kids terrorize anyone who doesn't fit their idea of what belongs here? I'm trying to find a practical resolution to a difficult situation, Mitchell replied. David turned toward the door, then paused. You have until tomorrow night to fix this. Transfer those boys to different classes, discipline them publicly, make it clear that harassment stops now, whatever it takes. And if I don't? Mitchell asked. David's smile was arctic. Then I handle it my way. Outside the office, the evening class was beginning. Through the doorway, David could see his sons warming up with other students. Their movements were still careful from the previous night's injuries. Jake and Connor were across the room, their body language relaxed and confident. Meanwhile, inside the office, Mitchell sat back down heavily, his mind racing through the implications of David's ultimatum. The Harrison and Mills families contributed over 30% of the dojo's revenue through monthly fees, private lessons, and equipment purchases. Losing them would mean cutting programs, laying off staff, and possibly closing entirely. But David Thompson had the look of a man who meant exactly what he said. Back at the Thompson house, the twins sat at the kitchen table working on homework, both of them glancing at the clock, anxiety building as the minutes ticked by. "What do you think he's going to say?" Michael asked, his pencil tapping nervously against his math textbook. "Whatever needs saying," Marcus replied, but his own tension was evident in the way he gripped his pen. "What if it makes things worse?" Marcus looked up from his history assignment. "How could they get worse? They're already trying to break us. They could actually break us or get us kicked out. Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing," Michael said, staring at his brother. Marcus gave him a pointed look. "We fight through this. We don't let them win." Despite their twin connection, sometimes Marcus's willingness to burn bridges surprised even him. "You want to quit?" Michael asked, his voice calm, as though he was already preparing for the response. "I want to be somewhere we're not treated like garbage every day," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "But I also want to prove we belong wherever we choose to be." Those two things might not be compatible. Then we make them compatible. The front door opened, and both boys looked up as their father entered. David's expression was grim, his military bearing more pronounced than usual. "How did it go?" Marcus asked. David hung his keys on the hook by the door and joined them at the table. Mitchell's more concerned about his donors than his students. He basically admitted he knows what's happening and doesn't plan to stop it. "So what now?" Michael asked. David was quiet for a moment, studying his sons' faces. These boys had inherited his stubborn streak and their mother's moral compass. They wouldn't back down from a fight, especially one that involved questions of dignity and respect. Now we prepare for the possibility that talking won't solve this problem. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, though something in his father's tone suggested he already knew. "It means if the system won't protect you, I'll teach you to protect yourselves." Really protect ourselves? Michael felt a chill of anticipation mixed with fear. "Are you talking about fighting?" "I'm talking about survival. Making sure nobody ever puts their hands on you again without consequences." That night, David cleared space in the garage and hung the heavy bag he'd retrieved from storage. The twins watched as their father transformed the mundane workshop into something that looked more like a training facility. "Your mother doesn't need to know about this yet," David said, testing the bag's stability. "This stays between us until we see how things play out at the dojo." "What exactly are you going to teach us?" Marcus asked. David's smile was sharp with promise. "Everything I learned in 8 years of military combat training. Everything they don't teach in pretty dojos with pretty rules." "Is that legal?" Michael asked. "Self-defense is always legal, and after what I saw tonight, what's been done to you boys, anything you do to protect yourselves will be justified." The twins exchanged a look that carried volumes of silent communication. Their father was offering them something the dojo never had: real power, real protection, real respect. "When do we start?" Marcus asked. "Right now," David replied, pulling on a pair of focus mitts. "Because tomorrow night we find out if Mitchell keeps his word, and if he doesn't." He let the sentence hang unfinished, but the implication was clear. The time for talking was almost over. The time for action was beginning. The garage felt different at 10 Geiner that night, transformed from a mundane workspace into something that hummed with purpose and possibility. David had moved his truck outside and rearranged tools and equipment to create an open training area. The heavy bag hung from a reinforced beam, swaying slightly in the cool evening air. "First lesson," David said, wrapping his hands with cloth strips. "Everything you've learned at that dojo is designed to make you predictable. Traditional stances, traditional combinations, traditional responses. In a real fight, predictable gets you hurt." Marcus and Michael stood side by side, still wearing their school clothes, unsure of what to expect from their father's version of martial arts instruction. "Dad," "We're not trying to hurt anyone," Michael said carefully. "We just want them to leave us alone." David's laugh was humorless. "Son, they've been hurting you for 2 months. This isn't about starting fights. It's about ending them quickly when they start with you." He demonstrated a basic stance that looked nothing like what they'd learned at the dojo. Lower, more mobile, hands positioned for striking rather than blocking. In the army, we didn't have time for fancy forms or elaborate techniques. We learned to neutralize threats efficiently and move on. That's what I'm going to teach you for the next hour. David ran them through drills that emphasized speed, aggression, and targeting vulnerable areas. No ritualized sparring, no pulled punches, no concern for tournament rules. "Hit the solar plexus, the throat, the knees," he instructed, holding the focus mitts for Marcus to strike. "Don't worry about looking pretty. Worry about making sure the other guy can't continue." The twins adapted quickly, their natural athleticism and months of basic training providing a foundation that David built upon with military precision. More importantly, they began to understand the mental shift their father was teaching, from defensive victims to aggressive defenders. "The next time that Connor kid grabs you," David told Marcus, "you don't try to escape the grip. You use it to get closer and hit him where it counts." "What if we get in trouble?" Michael asked. "For defending yourselves against documented bullies?" David said. "Let them try to explain that to your mother." Meanwhile, across town, the Harrison family sat around their dining room table discussing their son's martial arts progress. Richard Harrison, a successful insurance executive, took pride in Jake's advancement through the belt ranks and his position as one of the dojo's senior students. "Sensei Mitchell mentioned there might be some issues with newer students," Richard said, cutting into his steak. "Something about cultural differences affecting training." Jake nodded, keeping his expression neutral as he continued to spin the narrative. "There are these twin kids who started a few months ago. They're having trouble adapting to the discipline." "What kind of trouble?" his mother asked. "They get frustrated easily. Sometimes they don't show proper respect to senior students. Mitchell's been working with them, but they might not be a good fit for traditional martial arts." Richard frowned. "That's unfortunate, but not everyone is suited for the kind of character building that real martial arts provides." "Exactly," Jake agreed. "Some people just aren't cut out for it." The conversation continued in this vein, with Jake carefully crafting a story that positioned himself and Connor as patient mentors dealing with difficult students. His parents listened, satisfied, as their worldview was confirmed. Some families understood discipline and respect, while others simply didn't. Back in the Thompson garage, the training session was intensifying. David had moved beyond basic strikes to combination attacks and defensive counters. "They're going to try to use their size and belt rank to intimidate you," he said, circling the twins with a predatory focus. "But size means nothing if you're faster and more aggressive than they expect." He demonstrated a sequence that involved closing the distance, striking multiple targets, and creating space for follow-up attacks. The movements were brutal in their efficiency, designed to overwhelm rather than out-technique an opponent. "This isn't about being better martial artists than they are," David explained. "It's about being better fighters. There's a difference." Marcus threw a combination that landed solidly on the focus mitts, the impact resonating through the garage. For the first time in months, he felt powerful rather than helpless. "That's it," David encouraged. "Now add the knee strike we practiced. Don't give them time to recover." Michael's progress was equally dramatic. His analytical nature helped him understand the tactical principles behind each technique, while his suppressed anger provided the emotional fuel to execute them with conviction. "Remember," David said as they finished for the night, "this training stays between us. At the dojo, you act the same as always. Don't let them know what you're learning here." "How long do we keep pretending?" Marcus asked. David's smile was sharp with anticipation. "Until the right moment presents itself, and trust me, it will." The next evening at the dojo, The twins returned to their usual routine of enduring harassment and systematic abuse. But something fundamental had changed in their bearing. They still took the hits, still absorbed the insults, but their reactions were different, more controlled, more calculating. "You're getting better at taking punishment," Connor observed after a particularly brutal sparring session. "Maybe you're finally learning your place here." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "We're learning a lot." Jake noticed the change too. "They seem less reactive tonight," he mentioned to Connor during a water break. "Usually they get more frustrated as the session goes on. Maybe they're finally giving up." Connor replied, "About time." But giving up was the furthest thing from the twins' minds. As they endured another night of disguised torture, they were mentally cataloging their tormentors' fighting styles, identifying weaknesses, and planning responses they couldn't yet execute. Sensei Mitchell, meanwhile, was growing increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. David Thompson's ultimatum weighed heavily on his mind, but the financial realities of running the dojo made meaningful change seem impossible. After class, he pulled Jake and Connor aside. "I need you boys to be extra careful with the Thompson twins," he said quietly. "Their father made some complaints, and I don't want any unnecessary attention on our training methods." "What kind of complaints?" Jake asked. "The usual parent concerns about intensity. Nothing serious, but we need to be smart about how we handle things." Connor's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying we should go easy on them?" "I'm saying we need to be more subtle. Make sure everything looks like legitimate training if anyone's watching." The two teenagers exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They understood the game being played, maintain the abuse, but improve the optics. It was a challenge they were eager to accept. As the twins gathered their gear after class, they could feel the shift in atmosphere. Their tormentors were adapting, becoming more careful, but no less committed to their campaign of harassment. "They're going to be more careful now," Michael observed during the walk home. "Good," Marcus replied. "Careful means predictable. And predictable means we can prepare for exactly what they'll do." That night's training session in the garage focused on countering specific techniques they'd observed Jake and Connor using. David's military experience provided insights into reading opponents and exploiting their tactical assumptions. "They expect you to fight like yellow belts," he said, holding a focus mitt while Marcus practiced close-range combinations. "When the time comes, you'll fight like soldiers." The transformation was remarkable. In just 2 training sessions, the twins had begun to shed their victim mentality and embrace something far more dangerous: the mindset of predators, waiting for their moment to strike. 4 weeks of secret training had transformed the Thompson garage into a battlefield laboratory. The heavy bag bore the marks of countless combinations, and the concrete floor showed scuff marks where the twins had practiced footwork drills until muscle memory replaced conscious thought. Tournament registration closes. David set down the local martial arts magazine, the one featuring advertisements for the upcoming Tri-County Open, and looked at his sons. "Tomorrow," he announced. "You boys ready to make a decision?" Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead, his breathing steady despite the intense training session they had just completed. A month of his father's instruction had added muscle definition to his frame and confidence to his movements. "We're ready," he said without hesitation. Michael was quieter, studying the tournament flyer with analytical intensity. "Dad, this says they have divisions for different belt levels. We'd be competing against other yellow belts." "Not if you enter the open division," David replied, his tone carrying implications that made both boys look up sharply. "The open division is for anyone, regardless of rank," Marcus said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. "Including black belts," Michael added. David nodded. "The question is whether you're ready to show everyone what you've really learned. Not just defend yourselves, but dominate opponents who think they're superior to you." The garage fell silent, except for the gentle creaking of the heavy bag's chain. This was the moment all their training had been building toward. Not just physical preparation, but a fundamental choice about who they wanted to be. "If we do this," Michael said carefully, "there's no going back. Win or lose, everyone will know we're not the same kids who started at that dojo." "Are you the same kids?" David asked. Marcus flexed his hands, remembering the helpless frustration of those early weeks when every technique failed and every session ended in humiliation. "No, we're not. But what if we lose?" Michael pressed. "What if 4 weeks of training isn't enough to beat kids who've been doing this for years?" David's smile was fierce with paternal pride. "Son, they've been doing karate for years. You've been learning to fight. There's a difference." Later that night, the twins found themselves alone in their shared bedroom, wrestling with the moral complexity of their situation. "This feels wrong," Michael said quietly. "All the lying, the secret training, the planning for revenge. What feels wrong is letting them think they can treat us however they want," Marcus replied. "What feels wrong is a system that protects bullies because their parents write checks. But if we hurt them at the tournament, if we defend ourselves at the tournament, there's a difference." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Is there?" "Dad's not teaching us self-defense, Marcus," he said, his voice uncertain. "He's teaching us to be weapons." "Maybe that's what we need to be," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "Or maybe that makes us just like them." The conversation revealed the fundamental tension that had been building throughout their month of secret preparation. They had gained the physical skills to match their tormentors, but the moral questions remained unresolved. Meanwhile, in his own bedroom, David stared at the ceiling, grappling with his own ethical dilemmas. He had spent his adult life teaching his sons about honor, respect, and working within systems to solve problems. Now he was training them to circumvent those same systems through violence. But the memory of his boy's injuries, the racist comments overheard through dojo windows, the institutional indifference of Sensei Mitchell, all of it justified what he was doing, didn't it? The final decision was made during their conversation the following evening in the garage. "The tournament is in 3 weeks," David said, looking at each of his sons in turn. "If we're going to do this, I need to register you tomorrow. After that, there's no backing out." "What exactly are we signing up for?" Michael asked. "Just the tournament, or everything that comes after." David's expression grew serious. "Son, the moment you step into that ring and show what you can really do, everything changes. The dojo, the other students, probably the community. You'll be making a statement that can't be taken back." "Good," Marcus said firmly. "I'm tired of being quiet about who we are and what we can do." Michael looked at his brother, seeing the determination that had carried them through months of systematic abuse. Despite his reservations, he knew Marcus was right. They'd tried being victims, tried working within the system, tried enduring in hopes that things would improve naturally. Nothing had worked except becoming strong enough to demand respect. "Okay," Michael said finally. "Let's do it," David nodded, pride and apprehension warring in his expression. "Then tomorrow I register my sons for the open division of the Tri-County Open, and we spend the next 3 weeks making sure you're ready for whatever comes next." As they began their evening training session, all 3 Thompson men understood they had crossed a line from which there would be no retreat. The tournament would be more than a competition. It would be a reckoning. The Millbrook Community Center buzzed with nervous energy as competitors, families, and spectators filled the converted gymnasium for the Tri-County Open. Banners from various dojo banners hung from the rafters, and multiple rings were set up across the polished floor of the Millbrook Community Center, filled with nervous energy. The Thompson twins sat in folding chairs near the registration table, their yellow belts stark against the sea of higher-ranked competitors warming up around them. "Thompson, Marcus, and Michael," the tournament coordinator called out, checking his clipboard. "You boys sure you want the open division? We've got a nice yellow belt bracket that might be more appropriate. We're sure, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. David stood behind his sons, watching Jake Harrison and Connor Mills stretch with their teammates from Warriors Path Dojo. Both teenagers wore their black belts with casual arrogance, their conversation peppered with laughter as they glanced toward the Thompson family. "Look who decided to show up," Connor said loudly enough to carry across the warm-up area. "This should be entertaining." Jake nodded toward the twins. "I almost feel bad for them. Almost." Sensei Mitchell approached the group, his expression mixing surprise with barely concealed annoyance. "Mr. Thompson, I wasn't aware your sons were competing today." "Lots of things you're not aware of," David replied evenly. "Ring 3, Open Sparring Division," the announcer called. "First match, Connor Mills versus Michael Thompson." A hush fell over the Warriors Path Dojo section as the unlikely pairing was announced. Several parents exchanged knowing looks, anticipating a quick demonstration of why belt rankings existed. Michael walked to the center of Ring 3, his yellow belt drawing stares and whispered comments from the crowd. Connor followed with the confident swagger of someone expecting an easy victory. "Bow to your opponent," the referee instructed. Michael's bow was respectful but not subservient. Connor's was perfunctory, almost mocking. "Fighters, ready? Begin." Connor immediately launched into an aggressive combination, expecting to overwhelm his opponent with superior technique and experience. His first kick whistled through empty air as Michael sidestepped with fluid precision, a move that shouldn't have been possible for a yellow belt. The counterattack came faster than anyone expected. Michael closed the distance with explosive speed, landing a sharp punch to Connor's solar plexus that doubled him over. Before Connor could recover, Michael followed with a knee strike that caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. "Point Thompson," the referee called. Connor's face went white with shock and humiliation. This wasn't possible. Yellow belts didn't score against black belts, especially not with such clinical precision. Connor reset, his casual arrogance replaced by desperate aggression. He launched another attack, throwing wild combinations fueled by panic and embarrassment. Michael absorbed the initial strikes on his guard and then countered with surgical precision, a hook to the body followed by an uppercut that snapped Connor's head back. The black belt stumbled backward, his nose bleeding, his eyes wide with shock and growing rage. "Point Thompson, match, Thompson," the referee called. Connor stood frozen in the center of the ring, his face cycling through disbelief, humiliation, and burning fury. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly as the reality of his defeat sank in. When the referee raised Michael's hand in victory, Connor's composure finally cracked. "This is impossible," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "He's a yellow belt. This doesn't make sense." Meanwhile, Marcus was called to Ring 2 for his match against Jake Harrison. The older boy's confidence had evaporated, watching his friend's humiliation replaced by barely controlled panic. "This won't happen to me," Jake hissed as they faced off, his voice shaking with desperation. "I've been doing this since I was 8 years old." "Good for you," Marcus replied calmly. The match began with Jake employing frantic aggression, throwing everything he had learned in years of training. But Marcus had learned patience during those weeks of systematic abuse, and he waited for his moment. When Jake committed to a high kick, Marcus ducked under and drove an elbow into his opponent's exposed ribs. The impact was audible throughout the gymnasium, and Jake's scream of pain carried clearly to the shocked spectators. Before Jake could recover, Marcus grabbed his off-balance opponent and threw him with a hip toss that sent the black belt crashing to the mat with bone-jarring force. "Point Thompson!" Jake struggled to his feet, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down his face. The crowd was openly buzzing now, parents and competitors trying to process what they were witnessing. The second exchange was brief and devastating. Jake came forward with wild, desperate strikes. Marcus countered with surgical precision. A straight punch to the throat followed by a sweep that sent Jake tumbling. Point Thompson. Match. Thompson. Jake lay on the mat for several seconds, his body shaking with sobs of pure humiliation. When he finally stood, his face was a mask of hatred and wounded pride. The gymnasium erupted in confused chatter as both Thompson twins stood victorious. The Warriors Path dojo section exploded into chaos. "This is fraud!" Richard Harrison shouted, storming toward the tournament officials. "Those boys aren't yellow belts," Richard Harrison yelled, pointing at the twins. "They're sandbaggers." Bill Mills was right behind him, his face purple with rage. "They've been hiding their real skill level. This is cheating." Sensei Mitchell joined the angry parents, his voice shaking with desperation. "There's been some kind of mistake. These boys couldn't even defend themselves 2 months ago. Someone's been coaching them illegally. They're ringers," Richard continued, jabbing his finger toward the twins. "Professional fighters pretending to be beginners. I demand an investigation." The tournament director, a patient man in his 60s, tried to calm the situation. "Gentlemen, I've seen the boys' registration. They're legitimately ranked yellow belts from your own dojo." "Then they lied about their experience," Bill Mills snarled. "No yellow belt fights like that. It's impossible." Meanwhile, Jake and Connor stood together near their dojo seating area, their humiliation complete and public. Both teenagers were fighting back tears of rage, their carefully constructed image of superiority shattered in front of everyone they knew. "This isn't over," Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "They made us look like fools in front of everyone. They cheated somehow." Connor clenched his fists. "Yellow belts don't fight like that. It's not possible." David Thompson approached the agitated parents and officials, his expression dangerously calm. "Is there a problem here?" "Your sons are frauds," Richard Harrison accused, pointing at the twins. "They're not yellow belts. This whole thing is a setup." "They earned their yellow belts at your dojo," David replied evenly. 2 months ago in front of your instructor." "Then someone's been training them illegally," Bill Mills shouted. "No beginner develops skills like that." "Maybe your sons just aren't as good as you thought they were," David said, his voice carrying quiet menace. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Both fathers recoiled, their faces flushing with renewed anger at the suggestion that their sons, their perfect, superior sons, had been legitimately defeated by kids they considered inferior. "We know what we saw," Richard snarled. "Those boys humiliated Jake and Connor on purpose, made them look weak and stupid." "Maybe because Jake and Connor are weak and stupid," Marcus said quietly, appearing beside his father. The words struck like lightning. Jake Harrison let out a strangled cry of rage and started toward Marcus, but tournament security quickly intervened. "That's enough," the tournament director announced. "The matches were fair and legitimate. The results stand." As the twins collected their victory certificates and prepared to leave, the atmosphere remained charged with dangerous emotion. The systematic humiliation of Jake Harrison and Connor Mills had created enemies who would not forgive or forget. The Thompson family was walking toward the exit when Jake and Connor broke away from their parents and approached from behind, their faces streaked with tears of rage and humiliation. Their movements were desperate and uncontrolled. "Hey!" Jake called out, his voice cracking with emotion. Marcus and Michael turned around, still riding the high of their victories. They saw 2 defeated bullies approaching, but failed to recognize the dangerous desperation in their eyes. "You think you're so smart?" Connor snarled, closing the distance. "Think you proved something today?" "We proved we're better than you," Marcus replied, his confidence making him careless. It was exactly what Jake and Connor needed to hear. Their humiliation reached a breaking point, and all pretense of sportsmanship evaporated. Connor threw a wild punch at Michael's head, while Jake lunged at Marcus with a vicious tackle. Both twins went down hard, caught completely off guard by the cheap shots. The crowd erupted in shocked screams as Jake and Connor began raining down punches on the fallen boys, their months of frustrated anger finally exploding into violence. The cheap shots had caught the twins completely off guard, but their father's training kicked in within seconds. Marcus rolled away from Jake's wild punches and came up in a fighting stance, while Michael absorbed Connor's initial strikes and countered with a devastating uppercut that sent the black belt staggering backward. "You want a real fight?" Marcus snarled, his tournament composure replaced by raw fury. "Let's go." What followed was nothing like the controlled sparring they'd just won. This was street fighting, brutal and unforgiving, with months of suppressed rage finally exploding into violence. Marcus caught Jake with a combination that split his lip and bloodied his nose, while Michael systematically dismantled Connor with the kind of precise strikes their father had drilled into them during those secret training sessions. "Stop! Stop!" the tournament director shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos as spectators scrambled away from the expanding brawl. Jake tried to tackle Marcus again, but the twins sidestepped and drove a knee into his ribs that folded him in half. Connor managed to land a wild haymaker on Michael's shoulder, but the counterpunch that followed sent him crashing into a folding chair. Security guards finally reached the melee, grabbing all four fighters and forcibly separating them. Jake and Connor were both bloodied and battered, their black belts torn and stained with their own blood. The twins, while breathing hard, showed significantly less damage despite being jumped from behind. "What happened here?" the tournament director demanded. His face red with anger and embarrassment. "What happened here?" "They attacked us from behind," Michael said, wiping blood from a split lip. "We were walking away." "That's not what happened," Jake protested, his voice thick from his broken nose. "They started it. They've been provoking us all day." "By beating you fair and square," Marcus shot back. David Thompson pushed through the crowd, his face a mask of controlled fury as he quickly assessed his son's condition. Both boys were upright and alert, but the fact that they'd been jumped after legitimately winning their matches sent his protective instincts into overdrive. "Are you boys all right?" he asked, his hands checking for serious injuries. "We're fine, Dad," Marcus replied. "Better than them." Richard Harrison and Bill Mills arrived at the same time, their faces cycling between concern for their sons and rage at the situation. Both Jake and Connor looked like they'd been through a meat grinder, their martial arts pride ground into dust along with their physical dignity. "This is assault!" Richard shouted, pointing at the twins. "Those boys attacked my son." "After your son jumped them from behind," David replied, his voice dangerously quiet. In front of 200 witnesses, the tournament director consulted with his security team and several officials who had witnessed the incident. The conversation was brief and decisive. "Jake Harrison and Connor Mills are disqualified from this tournament and banned from all future regional competitions," he announced. "Attacking opponents after legitimate matches is completely unacceptable." "What about them?" Bill Mills demanded, gesturing at the twins. "They fought back. They defended themselves against an unprovoked attack," the director said. "That's not only legal, it's expected." The decision sent shockwaves through the Warriors Path Dojo contingent. Their star students weren't just defeated, they were disgraced, banned, and humiliated in front of the entire martial arts community. "This is outrageous," Sensei Mitchell protested. "There must be some mistake." "The only mistake," the tournament director replied coldly, "was allowing those boys to represent your school. Perhaps you should reconsider your training methods." As EMTs checked the injured fighters, the scope of the damage became clear. Jake had a broken nose, split lip, and what appeared to be bruised ribs. Connor sported a black eye, multiple facial lacerations, and was favoring his left arm. Both would need medical attention. The twins, by contrast, had suffered minor injuries despite being jumped from behind. Their father's training had not only prepared them to win fair fights, but to survive and dominate unfair ones. "We should press charges," Richard Harrison said to his wife, who had arrived with the other parents. "This was clearly premeditated assault against kids who were walking away when your son attacked them." David interjected, "Good luck with that." The Harrison and Mills families huddled together, their voices rising as they tried to process the complete collapse of their children's martial arts careers. The bands would follow Jake and Connor throughout their remaining teenage years, effectively ending any competitive aspirations they might have harbored. "This isn't over," Richard Harrison said directly to David as the families began to separate. "Not by a long shot. It is for your boys," David replied. "They made their choice when they jumped mine from behind." As the Thompson family gathered their things and prepared to leave, the gymnasium buzzed with excited conversation about the dramatic turn of events. The story would spread throughout the local martial arts community within hours, how 2 yellow belts had not only defeated established black belts in fair competition, but had dominated them in the street fight that followed. "Dad, they looked really angry when we left," Michael observed as they walked to the parking lot. "People don't like having their illusions shattered," David replied, "especially when those illusions involve their children's superiority." "What do you think they'll do?" Marcus asked. David was quiet for a moment, his military instincts analyzing potential threats and responses. "Probably nothing smart. Angry people rarely make good decisions." The drive home should have been celebratory. The twins had achieved complete vindication, proving their worth in both legitimate competition and street combat. But something about the Harrison and Mills families' parting words suggested this victory had come at a cost they hadn't yet calculated. At home, the twins cleaned their minor injuries, while David made sure all doors were locked and the security system was armed. Call it paranoia or experience, but something told him the confrontation at the tournament was just the beginning. Meanwhile, across town, 2 carloads of angry parents and humiliated teenagers were having a very different conversation about the day's events. The Harrison and Mills families had spent years believing in their son's superiority, their dojo's excellence, and their own social position. All of that had been shattered in one afternoon by 2 kids they dismissed as inferior. The rational response would be to accept defeat and move on. But rational responses required rational people, and the families gathered in the Harrison living room were far from rational. "We can't let this stand," Richard Harrison said, pacing his expensively furnished living room. "Our boys were humiliated, banned, destroyed in front of everyone we know." "It's not fair," Connor mumbled. David sidestepped Richard's wild punch effortlessly, countering with a precise strike to his solar plexus. Richard crumpled to his knees, gasping for air. Bill Mills, his face twisted in rage, rushed forward, swinging. But David was ready. With the fluidity of years of military training, David ducked under the punch, his movements calculated and efficient. He pivoted on his back foot and delivered a sharp elbow to Bill's ribs, causing him to stumble back in pain. "Last chance to walk away," David said again, his voice calm but firm, his stance ready. Richard, still on his knees, glared up at him, his breathing ragged. "You don't get to treat us like this," he snarled, trying to rise, his hand clutching his stomach where the strike had landed. Bill staggered backward, clutching his side. He shot a desperate look at Richard, his eyes flashing with frustration and fear. But David wasn't finished. He knew that if these men wouldn't back down, he'd have to make it clear where the line was drawn. "You're making a mistake," David said, his voice cold. "And I'm done talking." Bill, still clearly shaken, glanced toward Richard, who was struggling to get up. Richard shook his head, clearly in pain, but the fury in his eyes hadn't dimmed. "This isn't over, Thompson," Richard spat, his voice filled with venom. "We'll make sure you regret this. You and your sons won't get away with it." David stood tall, unfazed. "I think you've already made your regret, Richard." Before either of them could move again, David looked over his shoulder, his gaze hard and unyielding. "You've crossed the line. Stay off my property, now." The threat was clear, and with no more words left to say, David turned, his military precision evident in every move as he walked back toward the door, leaving the two men standing in the cold, their fury bubbling over, but knowing there was no further ground to gain. Inside the house, Lisa, who had been silently listening from the kitchen, looked up from where she had been watching through the window. Her heart was racing, but there was a quiet strength in her eyes as she met David's gaze. "It's done," David said, his voice softened now, yet still holding the weight of everything that had just transpired. "They're not coming back." Lisa nodded, though her concern still lingered. "What happens now?" David's expression hardened once again. "Now we wait. But if they think this is over, they're wrong. We'll handle it from here, together." As the night settled into an eerie quiet, the Thompson family knew that whatever the future held, their path forward would be shaped by the lessons they'd learned, not just in self-defense, but in standing up for what was right, no matter the cost, the gravity of the situation. Richard and Bill's anger boiled over, but it was now tempered by the harsh reality that they were in the wrong. Their previous position had crumbled under the weight of the facts. "Your boys are banned because they attacked other competitors after losing fair matches," Officer Martinez continued. "That's a decision made by the martial arts organization, not the law, unless you want to add filing false reports to your citations." The threat hung in the air like a guillotine, the full weight of it settling on Richard and Bill's shoulders. The two men stood frozen, their faces a mixture of rage and disbelief, but the situation had already shifted. The officers were clearly on David's side. As the sound of approaching sirens echoed through the night, the tension between the two parties was palpable, but it was clear now who held the upper hand. Bill Mills struggled to hold back his frustration. "So what now?" he spat, his voice shaking with anger and humiliation. "We just walk away from this?" "Yes," Officer Martinez said firmly. "You're both getting citations for trespassing and disturbing the peace. Mr. Thompson is within his rights to defend his property and himself. Now, I strongly suggest you cool down before this escalates any further." Richard Harrison's face flushed with humiliation as he wiped blood from his nose. His voice was shaky, but the anger hadn't left him. "Our boys were humiliated today, their futures destroyed, 7 years of training gone, college scholarships gone, and now we're the ones getting cited? Your sons are banned from competition because they attacked other competitors after losing matches," Officer Martinez repeated calmly. "The martial arts organization made that decision, not the police. Do you want to add making false statements to your citations?" Bill Mills looked like he was about to protest further, but the officer's words hit home. They both realized that escalating the situation any further would only make it worse. David stood calmly, his expression unreadable, but there was a quiet confidence in his stance. He had the situation under control. The anger and aggression that had fueled the confrontation in the beginning were now replaced with a sense of calm resolution. The officers moved to separate the two groups, with Officer Johnson moving to escort Richard and Bill away from the porch. "You'll be hearing from us regarding the citations," he said, his tone businesslike. David turned to face the officer, his voice steady. "I appreciate your help, officer. They came onto my property uninvited and escalated the situation. I've done what I had to do to protect my family." "We understand," Officer Martinez replied, looking at David with respect. "But I would suggest everyone take a step back and let the legal process handle it from here." As the Harrison and Mills families were escorted away, their faces twisted with rage and humiliation, David closed the door behind him and exhaled deeply. The immediate threat had passed, but the fallout from today's events was far from over. Inside, Lisa was waiting for him, her expression full of concern. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, noticing the faint bruises forming on his face from the earlier confrontation. "I'm fine," David replied. "We're all fine. but we've got a long road ahead of us. The twins, Marcus and Michael, were standing in the living room, their faces still marked from the chaos earlier in the day. Their expressions reflected the weight of the day's events, the tournament victories overshadowed by the vicious confrontation that followed. "You did what you had to do," Marcus said quietly, his voice strong despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "I can't believe it's come to this, but I'm glad we did it." Michael nodded, his usual quiet demeanor tempered by the knowledge that things were changing. "It's not over, though. There's still a lot we have to deal with." David looked at his sons, pride swelling in his chest. "I know, but whatever happens, we face it together. We stand strong. We keep our heads high." The night was far from over, and the challenges ahead were daunting. But as the Thompson family gathered together, they knew one thing for certain. They had crossed a line, and they wouldn't back down now. The fight was far from over, but they had shown everyone, most importantly themselves, that they were more than capable of standing their ground. Their night was only getting worse. They'd come seeking confrontation and validation, but found only additional humiliation and legal consequences. Meanwhile, inside the house, the twins had been watching through their bedroom window, their mother having reluctantly allowed them to witness the resolution of events they'd inadvertently set in motion. "Dad's okay," Marcus whispered, relief evident in his voice as they watched their father speaking calmly with the police. "More than okay," Michael replied, noting the battered condition of their former tormentors' fathers. "Looks like those guys learned the same lesson their sons did." Lisa Thompson stood in the doorway, her nurse's training warring with her protective instincts as she watched her husband handle the aftermath of violence with military precision. "Your father's always been good at taking care of problems," she said quietly. Outside, the police were finishing their paperwork and preparing to clear the scene. The two injured fathers sat in the back of separate patrol cars, their citations being processed while they received basic medical attention for their injuries. "Mr. Thompson," Officer Martinez said, approaching David as the situation wound down, "you handled yourself well tonight, but I'd recommend installing security cameras and maybe varying your family's routine for a while. People like this sometimes hold grudges." "Already planned on it," David replied. "Thank you for responding so quickly. Just doing our job. And Mr. Thompson, your boys did good today. Sometimes bullies need to learn that actions have consequences." As the police cars pulled away, taking Richard Harrison and Bill Mills to face booking and citations, David stood on his porch, surveying the quiet suburban street. The confrontation he'd been expecting since the tournament was over had resolved decisively in favor of his family. The twins emerged from the house, their faces mixing relief with residual adrenaline from the night's events. "Is it over, Dad?" Michael asked. David looked at his sons, both stronger, more confident, and more capable than they'd been just months ago. They'd faced systematic bullying, overcome institutional indifference, and emerged victorious against opponents who'd considered them inferior. "It's over," he said firmly. "They know now that you boys aren't victims, that our family isn't going to be pushed around. And most importantly, they know that actions have consequences." Marcus nodded, understanding the deeper lesson their father was teaching. "We don't start fights, but we finish them." "Exactly," David replied. "But we also don't go looking for trouble. Tonight was about them bringing trouble to us. That's different." As they headed inside, David took one last look at his quiet neighborhood. Tomorrow, there would be paperwork to file, security systems to install, and probably difficult conversations with school administrators and tournament officials. But tonight, his family was safe. His sons had learned the value of standing up for themselves, and two bullying fathers had discovered that their children weren't the only ones who could face consequences for their actions. The lesson was complete, the victory total, and the transformation of the Thompson twins from victims to victors was absolute. 6 weeks after the tournament, the Warriors Path dojo sat empty. except for Sensei Robert Mitchell, who was packing equipment into cardboard boxes with the methodical resignation of a man watching his life's work crumble around him. The investigation had been swift and thorough. The Regional Martial Arts Association had interviewed students, parents, and tournament witnesses, creating a damning picture of systematic harassment enabled by an instructor who prioritized donor money over student safety. Mitchell's teaching certification had been revoked, and the dojo's charter with the national organization had been permanently suspended. 30 families canceled their memberships in 2 weeks, Mitchell muttered to himself as he wrapped his black belt collection in tissue paper. 15 years of building this place gone. The financial reality had been brutal. Without the Harrison and Mills families' substantial monthly contributions, with parents pulling their children en masse after learning about the harassment scandal, the dojo couldn't meet its lease payments. The landlord had been sympathetic but firm. Businesses that generated negative publicity weren't welcome in a shopping center. Meanwhile, across town at the newly opened Integrity Martial Arts Academy, the Thompson twins were demonstrating techniques to a group of younger students. The new dojo, run by a former Marine named Master Chen, had attracted many of the families who had fled Warrior's Path after the scandal broke. Remember, Marcus explained to an 8-year-old white belt who was struggling with a basic block, martial arts is about protecting yourself and others. It's never about hurting people who can't defend themselves. That's right, Master Chen added, watching the twins work with their students. These young men understand what real martial arts means. Strength used to protect, not to bully. The twins had advanced rapidly under Master Chen's guidance, earning their orange belts within a month of joining the new school. More importantly, they'd found their place as respected senior students, helping newer members adapt to training without fear of harassment. I heard Jake Harrison is working at his dad's insurance office now, Michael mentioned during a break between classes. Connor Mills is doing online school instead of going back to Millbrook High. Good, Marcus replied without malice. Maybe they'll learn something useful. The ripple effects of the tournament had extended far beyond the martial arts community. Richard Harrison's insurance business had lost several clients after word spread about his late-night confrontation at the Thompson house. Bill Mills had been passed over for a promotion at his law firm, his professional reputation tarnished by the police citations and associated publicity. At Millbrook High School, the story had become legend. The Thompson twins, once seen as quiet newcomers, were now known as the brothers who'd taken down the town's martial arts bullies and exposed corruption at the most established dojo in the area. It's weird being famous for fighting, Michael confided to his brother as they walked home from the new dojo. Better than being famous for getting beaten up, Marcus replied with a grin. At home, David Thompson was installing the last of the security cameras around their property, a precaution that had proven unnecessary as the Harrison and Mills families had retreated into embarrassed isolation following their legal difficulties. "How was class?" he asked as the twins entered through the garage. "Good. Master Chen says we might be ready for green belts by Christmas," Michael reported. "More importantly, we helped 3 new kids with their techniques today," Marcus added. "Nobody gets picked on at our new school." David nodded with satisfaction. The transformation was complete. His sons had gone from victims to protectors, using their hard-won skills to ensure other children wouldn't face the systematic harassment they'd endured. Lisa Thompson emerged from the kitchen, her expression mixing pride with lingering concern for her family's safety. "Any word on when the dojo officially closes?" "End of the month," David replied. "Mitchell's been trying to sell his equipment, but most schools won't touch anything associated with his program." "What about Jake and Connor? Have they found other places to train?" "Doesn't matter," Marcus said firmly. "They're banned from competition until they're 18 anyway, and even then, their reputations will follow them." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door, a sound that still triggered cautious awareness in the Thompson household. But this visitor was expected and welcome. Master Chen stood on the porch, holding a manila envelope and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. "I wanted to deliver these personally," he said, handing the envelope to David. Official certificates for Marcus and Michael's Orange Belt promotions were inside, along with letters of recommendation for a youth leadership program run by the State Martial Arts Association. They wanted the boys to help train instructors in anti-bullying techniques. Master Chen explained, "Apparently, their story has gotten attention at the state level. Other schools want to learn how to prevent what happened at Warriors Path." The twins exchanged glances, their silent communication as strong as ever. After months of being targets, they were being asked to help protect others from similar experiences. "We'd be honored," Michael said, speaking for both of them. As Master Chen left and the family settled into their evening routine, the transformation that had begun in a garage with a heavy bag and focus mitts reached its natural conclusion. The Thompson twins hadn't just learned to defend themselves, they'd become leaders, examples of how victims could become protectors through determination and proper training. "You boys proud of what you've accomplished?" David asked, as they sat around the dinner table. "Proud we didn't quit," Marcus replied. "Proud we proved we belonged wherever we choose to be," Michael added. "And proud we can help other kids avoid what we went through," they said together, their twin synchronization intact despite all the changes in their lives. Outside, Millbrook continued its quiet, suburban existence, but the power dynamics that had once seemed fixed and permanent had been completely rewritten. The bullies had been exposed and defeated. The corrupt instructor had lost everything, and two young men who had once been considered easy targets were now respected leaders in their community. Sometimes justice came slowly, through courts and committees and official procedures, but sometimes it came swiftly, delivered by those who refused to accept that strength belonged only to those who abused it. The Thompson twins had learned both lessons well, and they would carry them forward for the rest of their lives. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I've handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you'll enjoy. Have a great day.